All right, folks, I guess we're going to get started. My name is Kurt Pflughoeft. I'm the director of the Data Analytics Center here at the Sentry School of Business and Economics. So again, thank you for coming. A little bit different format, but I'm kind of used to this format. It's kind of a little bit of a funner format. And either I bribe students with extra credit or food. So I'm not sure about the people from industry, but thank you again for coming. So we're going to have basically 3 speakers. I'm going to do the easy part, which is the intro. And then this is really based off of a student project from a capstone course. And Alick Corbley is going to do the difficult part of the presentation. He's going to take a look at the data challenges that we encountered. Then we're going to have Dr. Butz, and he's going to do the modeling part. So feel free to ask us questions. We may have to repeat the question because we're recording it, just so you know. I'm not stalling for time to think of an answer. But anyhow, just keep that in the back of your mind. A couple of housekeeping issues. The bathrooms are kind of down the hall, and then you take a right just a little bit. If you can make sure that your phones are on a silent mode, that would be pretty good for us as well. Let's see, anything else? I think we can get started. So our talk is on customer attrition. Customer attrition is a very big deal for many companies and other types of organizations. Just to kind of give you an idea, if you take a look at Stephen's point and we go back a year and look at first year students, we lose about 20 to 25% of our students, okay? So the attrition rate is high. And just think for a minute, if we could cut that in half, right? If we could knock it down to, let's say, 12% or something like that, that would have a huge financial benefit to the organization. And so you start to see now that organizations, of course, they always paid attention to attrition, but there's a little bit renewed focus in that area, especially in telecommunications. So when we talk about customer attrition, just realize there's a lot of synonyms and antonyms that are used. Sometimes they say attrition, sometimes they say churn, sometimes they say defection. Sometimes they'll use antonyms like survival analysis, loyalty analysis, retention. Those are all the same thing, at least for this presentation. We're actually going to do attrition and telecom for an internet service provider that uses fixed wireless access. So again, I'm kind of excited for it, but I'm a data geek, right? So let's move on to the next slide. I guess I don't have someone to do that. All right, I'll do it myself. All right, so I want to thank Bug Tussel. We've had kind of a longer relationship with them for a couple of years. It initially started with a former student that also did a project there. She was trying to figure out basically what sites were good for cell tower locations. And she presented this to the former CEO, Steve Schneider. He presented it to some of the national carriers that they have partnerships with. And then about a year ago, Nick, Grace, and myself, we got it published. It's an open access journal. You can go to it. You can see that since summer, we got 2,500 unique views. In fact, we got a note from the editor, and he was pretty happy about that. So it seems like we get like 10 people looking at that article every day, which is kind of interesting. So I don't really work at Bug Tussel, but sometimes I feel like I do, but I play one on TV. So I'll tell you what Steve Schneider told me. He told me that the primary mission of Bug Tussel was to provide internet services to rural customers. They have about 600 towers now. Most of them are in Wisconsin. Some of them are in northern Michigan and Iowa. They have about 10,000 internet customers. And those towers can be used for other purposes like cellular communications as well. So they have a partnership with AT&T. And I always used to call them Bug Tussel Wireless, but now they've expanded into fiber. And so they kind of did a little bit of rebranding. I think Bug Tussel comes from the Beverly Hillbillies or something, right? It's a location, right?
Correct. The Clampetts came from Bug Tussel, Tennessee.
So it's a little, I didn't remember that, but I remember Steve told me about that. So you might say, what is fixed wireless access all about? You're probably familiar with it because you have most likely a wireless router that you use at home or the university or whatever, where you can go anywhere within your house and still be connected to the internet without actually having some sort of, cable connection, right? Now, if you think about fixed wireless access, it's a little bit broader, okay? In the cities, they're actually using fixed wireless access with 5G. You kind of think of 5G always for mobile communications, but in the cities now, they're using it for kind of what is known as the last mile, because it's a lot more cost effective than running all of these lines to individual residences. When you start talking about rural areas, it's not really a last mile per se. It's probably 5 miles, but you can go a little bit farther, depending upon the circumstances. So it's a very important technology to have connectivity for rural communities. These are some of the locations for Bug Tussel on their towers in red there. Again, you can kind of see they're in rural areas. They're not really in Madison or Milwaukee per se. And if you look on the right for the blue, you can see that they have a fair amount of competition also from other fixed wireless access providers. So you might say, why is customer attrition important for telecom? I can tell you, I worked 19 years in market research. Probably 15 years ago, not too many companies cared about customer retention. For example, I worked at a company called Airtel in India. I found out that they were acquiring 1 million new customers per month. I mean, it was shocking. Of course, India's got a big population, right? But they didn't really care too much about, customer retention. It was all about acquisition. Things have slowly changed. The market has become a little bit mature, right? And we have a quote here from the CEO of T-Mobile that basically says, hey, we're at a crossroads for telecommunications. Things are getting more expensive to make these connections and make them faster. And we do have to focus a little bit more on customer retention. It's not all about acquisition anymore. And if you look at general studies for customer retention, it's economically beneficial to do it. Why? Because customers at risk to retain them, it's 3 to 5 times lower for a cost than actually acquiring new customers. Obviously, acquiring new customers requires advertising and a bunch of other efforts. So attrition, when I worked in market research, I was like, oh, these are tough studies, okay? One of the toughest studies I've ever worked on are always attrition studies. And you might say, why is that the case? Think about yourself. You have a product or service and you no longer use it. There's a lot of different reasons for people to stop using a product and service. And then the question is can you get all that type of data to create a model? If I was just creating a predictive model to say you're most likely to attrit, that's not so important. But usually management wants an explanatory model. They want to say, tell me the 5 most important things when it comes to customer attrition. So it's important to try to find these variables, even if they're not at the company. And we acquired a lot of data outside the company as well. Just to give you an analogy, let's say I was trying to predict gas mileage for a vehicle, right? If I didn't have weight, I don't know if I would trust my model, right? Because weight is a very important factor. So I got to really make sure that I get the right variables in the model. So there are some data challenges, and Alick will talk much more about this. But obviously, when you're a small company, you're not so focused in on your data strategy per se, or keeping data associated with past customers, right? You're looking at profitability, market share, revenue growth, etc. But I will tell you that small companies and even large companies don't always do a great job saving customer data. And that's really kind of an important thing, because the old saying says, if you can't learn from your mistakes in the past, you're bound to repeat them where? In the future again, right? So save that data. It's very valuable. We're trying to make organizations data-centric, okay? And the reason for making organizations data-centric is there's a lot of studies that show those types of decision-making processes outperform things like gut instinct. So that's why we have this whole data analytics project and why Alex is kind of working on this. I want to call him Alex because that's the name of my son. But anyhow, another challenge for attrition studies is mergers and acquisitions. So for example, I did a big attrition study once for US Bank, okay? Well, it used to be First Wisconsin, and then it became First Star, and then it became US Bank. When were they really a US Bank customer, right? It was kind of hard to figure out, when should I count that for their tenure? So when I was in industry, I was a little bit of an odd duck. I kind of was in charge of market research. If we did a large project, I kind of made my employees do a little bit of a literature review. Not so much that they had to do an academic presentation, but I didn't want to always reinvent the wheel. I wanted to know basically how people had done these types of studies in the past and what was successful. There are a ton of studies on customer attrition when it comes to telecom, when it comes to insurance companies, when it comes to banking, et cetera. Now, with that being said, we found no studies for fixed wireless access and attrition, but that doesn't mean I can't learn from the other studies in general. Even mobile, you might say, well, mobile is completely different. But if you actually look at the data, most mobile communication occurs in fixed places, like your house or at school or at work. So there's a lot of things we can learn from attrition studies in mobile communications. There has to be a lot of data cleaning. We spent, I think, 8 months, is that right? Probably on data cleaning, maybe a month on modeling, okay? We could have just grabbed the data, run a model, but it would have been garbage in my opinion, okay? And the old saying is what? Garbage in, garbage out. So it doesn't have to be perfect in the end, but as engineers would say, is that the signal has to be stronger than the noise. Otherwise, we can't find the patterns within the data. You might say, is data quality a big deal? Well, I think I gave a talk similar to this like 20 years ago, and the estimate was it cost American businesses about $600 billion, to have bad data. There was a recent study in Harvard Business Review, which was a good periodical, and they estimated it at 3.1 trillion. At first, I didn't really believe it, to tell you the truth, because I'm like, that's 12% of GDP. But actually, when I started thinking about it more and how much time in my career I spent on data issues, I was starting to think that's probably the case, right? It makes it harder to do analysis, you miss opportunities for the organization, et cetera. So usually when I walk into a firm, 15 to 20% of their data is unusable. You always have this risk that I'll say, I'll do a customer attrition study for you. And I walk in, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I should have said that. The data's not going to cooperate here. But one thing I want to tell you is that data is a very valuable resource, right? It's an asset for the firm. I know from an accounting point of view, it isn't. But if you walk into organizations, you say, what's your most valuable asset? Probably most of them would say people, right? Our employees. I would hope in the top 5, it would be data as well, okay? We used to say in the old days, the data is your new oil. Maybe now it's more politically correct to say new renewable energy. But the point is that data is a good asset. So when I walk into the organizations, I didn't learn this until I did a few projects, is that most of my questions always revolve around data. There's a lot of data audit questions that I ask. For example, the characteristics, is it timely, accurate, relevant? And the who, what, where, when, why, how, all those types of questions. I'll give you an example, not from telecommunications. I did a big competitive benchmark study for Xerox when they used to sell photocopying equipment. They don't do that anymore. But they said they had competitive data. So based on that, we had a bid, right? Because it's expensive to get competitive data. So I started doing the analysis. I tried to do data collection. I ran into all sorts of problems. I'm like, what is going on here? So I called Xerox and I said, where did you get this data from? And they said, when a repair person goes to basically one of our customers, if they see a competitive machine, they will write down the make and model. Well, that sounds good in theory, right? But guess what? The repair people didn't really care. So a lot of them didn't do it. A lot of them weren't very accurate on the make and model, and basically had to throw the data away and start over. So you have to really ask a lot of questions. So on this study, we are going to only look at residential customers because we basically want to refer to demographics, things like income, age, et cetera. When you start talking about supplying services to businesses, then you got to have firmographics. How big is the firm? How many employees, their sales? We didn't want to do that. When you look at attrition studies, sometimes they'll only go back a few years, like 7 years or something. We went back kind of all the way. So I want to kind of caution you. You'll probably see some high churn rates, okay? But keep in the back of your mind, that's because we looked at a long time frame, right? And in the end, everybody will churn for one reason or the other, right? We're not going to be around forever. So keep that in the back of your minds. I don't know how much I want to say on this because Alick is going to go into this in a little bit more detail. But these are some of the categories that we had to try to acquire data for that either were within the firm or outside of the firm. I'm just going to mention a few of them. One of them that we kind of had a little bit of an issue is customer behavior. For telecom, usually how many times they contact the call center is pretty important. You usually have to have pretty good CRM systems to capture those interactions. Of course, there's other things like competition. It's not just fixed wireless access. It's also what? It's going to be cable and fiber optics, but that's not as prevalent, obviously, in rural communities, although that is changing a bit. So with that, I'm going to let it to my competent student. There you go.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so this is a data deep dive and some of the exploratory analysis that we did throughout the project. So this is our data. Right here, we have our variables in blue. You can see some of the variables that we use to explain the dependent variables, which would be the two red ones. We had two dependent variables for this one because we ran a different kind of model that can have two of them, and that predicts how long they're going to stay and if they will stay. So it predicts both of those things, which can be very powerful. We had a multitude of sources, such as Melissa, Bug Tussel, US Census, and the FCC. The only one that we had to purchase was Melissa, and we'll get into that later, but it was not very expensive, and it was very thorough for what we thought it would be. So some of the data issues that we had. The FCC, they have a problem with some of their granularity. They have their census blocks, and they're rather large, and if one person in the census block can get service, they assume all can, which is not always the case. Sometimes it's maybe just a small subset, sometimes maybe half, maybe even more than that, but it doesn't mean everyone can. So that was a bit of an issue. Also, we had some problems with our own CRM systems. Like when customers would leave, sometimes we would just delete their plans and what plans they had. If they changed like from 5 megs to 10, they would just remove that past information, which is stuff that we would like to keep in the future. So this is something that Uber made that can counteract some of those things that the FCC had issues with. So they do a hexagonal system instead of a census block ID. And that is a little bit more of a guarantee on if someone in that area can get internet or not. So they have like a fixed size instead of having very large census blocks in rural areas and rather small ones in metropolitan. So this was a little bit more accurate. We didn't use this in the study. We found out about it a little bit later, but it is another option at least for other people trying this study. And now onto the Melissa data. So sometimes if you purchase data, it can be up to 50 cents or $1 a record. We were able to get it for $400, which is, I did the math, it was like 2 or 3 cents a record or something like that, like really cheap. And we thought that maybe if you paid a little less, it would be kind of garbage data and that could cause issues, but it ended up actually being very successful, high quality data. And we were just lucky that it was inexpensive. It had some really important variables that we used as well, like the household income, the number of adults, age, credit card info, and many more. It was not just those few. They had a lot of variables that we ended up putting majority of them into the model. So this is some R code. This was able to get the census block ID for each customer, which helps us like find if they have an indicator variable for if they have fiber, wireless, other different kinds of internet that we used again in the model. And then it was also able to give us some of the information on these customers, like population density in the area that they're in. So that was something that was really powerful for us. This is some R code that we used. And this is a kind of funny situation because Professor Pflughoeft had the code on the left. And it wasn't that the code was bad. It took a couple days to run, which is unfortunate, but still works. And it was very, very accurate. And it gave the distance from a customer to their adjacent tower. The problem with that, though, is waiting a couple days is not really the best deal. You don't want to wait that long just to run some code. So we plugged it into ChatGPT and asked if they could rewrite it in a more efficient and robust way. And it was able to spit out a way that ran in a matter of minutes. So we went from days to minutes. And that's a pretty big jump. So we were very happy with that. And some of this code we plan on using for other things in Bug Tussel in the future. A lot of different purposes for that. So some of our exploratory demographics. So customer age. We know as our company that a lot of our customers are a little bit older in those rural areas. And we can see that 50s, 60s, and 70s are the main groups that we have for our customers. We still do have customers of all age ranges. That you can see like 20s and 90s have some, but they are a lot smaller than the main ones. Some now the length of residence on the right. As you can see, most of our customers have either lived in their home for a very long time or they're newly moved. And I believe that that makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of the customers in the rural area probably have had their houses or farms or family areas for a very long time and passed it down. So as we can see, that one is the most common. And we have more demographics here. As you can see, 2 adults per household is the most common one. Again, this is something that we kind of expected because the only way that it's going to be more than that is if they have children who are over the age of 18 in their household. So a lot of those families, a lot of the people that have 2 can be older couples where it's just them and their kids are all moved out. Could be a younger family, or it could even be someone who has just 3 kids under the age of 18. It can kind of vary in that aspect. But then we have some that are like 3, 4, 5, and 6. Holy cow, 6. That's a lot of people. Customer income. We have people from all different ranges, which honestly is very cool for me to see that we support so many different people, that we're able to help people who don't make as much money, people who make a ton of money. We're able to help everybody out. Although our most common is 50 to 75,000 a year. I think that that is pretty cool that we have age ranges, family ranges, income ranges of all kinds. It's a really wide variety of people that we serve. So now causes of attrition. There are 2 kinds. So it's not always cut and dry. They don't like the service, they leave. There's usually a lot of different aspects involved. So there's voluntary, where they leave because they wanted to leave. There was something like a competitor that had better pricing, poor internet service, or poor customer service that really made them upset and they wanted to go elsewhere. But then there's involuntary churn, where it's not really their fault. Some cases they moved, other cases they died or were incarcerated, which was really shocking that we have 88 people who did that. I was very shocked by that. We thought that that would be something, even house fire on there too. Some of those things are very crazy. There's no way that we're going to be able to predict house fires, death, and incarceration. And even if we could, I don't think we want to be in the business of doing that. So we had to remove the involuntary people because that was not what we were trying to predict. That was not the purpose of this. And then we were able to just take the voluntary people and make the model with them. So this slide, a lot of graphics, but I'll go through and explain each one by one. So beginning, our monthly attrition rate is about 2% month over month, which is pretty much industry average. Then for our pie chart over here, you can see how many of our customers were involuntary and how many were voluntary. Just a reminder, the voluntary are the good ones. Those are the ones we keep. So it was good that we had a large sum of those people staying in our report for the model. Then overall survival curve we have is that little black line. So you can see about 1,000 days, there is about 70% of our customer base retained. The y-axis is the customer base retained, and then the x-axis is the number of days. And then that map of Wisconsin with the heat map on it, the counties that are highlighted more or that are more white, those counties have really good churn rates for us. And those are counties that we want to target more with trying to get customers because they leave a lot less. Or we want to see what we do right in those counties that we don't in others. The ones that are in very dark red, I know Richland is one of them that's very red. That is one that we do poor in. And we want to see what do we do in the white ones that we can start to do in the red ones and make it more even throughout all our counties. So customer profiles. We did a little cluster analysis as well to kind of see what customers we have. And these were the 3 main profiles we came up with. The main one was someone who is 40, young and mobile, on the move. They don't need super fast internet, but they need cheap internet. They usually have an income of about $45,000 a year, a speed plan of 5 megabits, and then plan price about $40 a month. Our second profile is a 50-year-old family, or a 50-year-old with a family who has high income and needs for fast internet. Maybe they're working from home, maybe their kids have schoolwork, they might even be remote for school once in a while. The list goes on. So their income is about $65,000 a year, their plan speed is about 25, and their plan price is about $70 a month. The last group, this is the 65 plus range, and they have a medium income, so a little bit better than the first category, but a little better in the second. And they have a need for better internet, but not as much as the family, because it is still less people in that house, but they're doing things like video chatting grandkids, possibly, maybe even using it for their own personal needs. I'm not 100% sure what all the reasons would be, but their speed plan is about 10 megabits per second. Their income is about $50,000 a year, and then plan price about $50. So now we're on to the survival curves, or you can call them the Kaplan-Meier plots. So as you can see, we have 3 different lines. The blue is customers who are 50 or older. And then the green is people who are between the ages of 30 and 40. And the red is 30 or younger. The steeper the slope, the more likely they are to attrit. As you can see on the age churn rate, little data table we have up there. that is the churn rate of the different populations. So the higher it is, the worse it is. So as you can see, 66% for less than 30, 52% for between 30 and 40, and then 41 for 50 plus. And then the age mean tenure, which is the data table under that, that shows how on average how long people from that group would stay with our service. So that's in days, and 660, 950, and then 1,330. So one thing to take away from this, I'll let you guys take it in for a second because there's a lot of stuff on here. But the main thing that you can take away from this is that the older customers tend to be more loyal, which is something that we might have thought beforehand. But even doing this and proving ourselves that we're doing it right is always something good to know once in a while. So then this is the same thing as the last one, but this is based off cable status now. So the red line is if they do not have access to cable, and then the blue is if they do. And this is stuff that we got from FCC, like I explained before, where we joined that with the FCC census block ID. And as you can see, if you look at the red line, it is more common for those people to be more loyal if they do not have access to cable in the area. And you can see it's a pretty decent amount too, pretty wide difference in those two different customer bases. So this is a variable that we found pretty important. Now, survival curves by zone. So this map up on the top right, little confusing. This is a Bug Tussel map. This breaks all of our customers into regional zones. We have BDMs, which are basically sales representatives who interact with customers in those zones, make sales, build good rapport with customers that are existing in those areas. And it's a really neat feature about us that a lot of other internet providers do not have. But the ones highlighted in black are zones 1, 2, and 3, which are some of our more loyal zones. And I knew there was a little more loyalty in it, but I have to say this kind of shocked me a little bit how much more loyal it was. So zones 1 through 3 have a churn rate of about 31%, whereas the other ones have about a 54%. So that's a pretty vast difference. And then the mean tenure for zones 1 through 3 is about 1,450 days. And through zones 4 through 13, it is about 1,080 days. So now this shows the plan price for the customer associated to their attrition rate. So as you can see, the more expensive their plan is, the more likely they are to stay. Sounds kind of backwards, right? The more expensive the plan is, why would they want to stay more? But it's a bit of a proxy for speed. So when you think about it, when your plan goes up in price, so does your speed, and there's less competitors to match that speed. There's more reliability with those speeds. Sometimes you can jump for broadband to fiber in some instances, not in this case, but if we did another study and there was fiber stuff involved, I'm sure that the churn rate would be even lower. So very powerful information there. Do not assume that as raise your prices. Do not assume to do that. That will not work. So as you can see, there's the one red dot up there. We put a big X on. That was caused by some of the issues we had with our data collection through the company. It had a 100% churn rate. So that means everybody left who had that plan, which is not the case. We were able to fix that through some really good imputation that Professor Pflughoeft was able to discover and help us with. And we ended up doing a really good job making that into something that was very usable for the model. And I believe now it is Professor Butz's turn.
Thanks, Alec. Appreciate it. All right, I'm just going to reset the camera tracking so we can look at this again. Normally it comes to me anyway because I have the suit and tie on. So it just knows, you know. It knows who to follow. Let me check.
Wow.
Yeah, you see that? All right. So thanks so much. I want to, first of all, thank my co-authors for basically bringing me on. I'll be honest, they deserve like 90% of all the accolades for this project, but thanks so much for bringing me with for the ride. I learned a lot in the process as well. And I actually had Alec as a student in data viz. Did you see all those cool graphs he made? Man, that's so proud. So thanks so much for bringing me with on this. I'm going to talk about the modeling, which I'm like, let me get this straight. I got to jump on. And now I got to do the results and skip the lit review. Like, this is the best day ever. So thank you. I appreciate that. So I did have to say to them, though, I'm like, if I'm going to bring on, don't censor me. And what's the first slide they stick me with? Censoring. Okay. All right. It's a little wordplay here. I'm talking not about censoring, like, don't say this. I'm talking about censoring in the data. So when you have a longitudinal study, something that's going to take a lot of time, we often run into an issue that we need to start analyzing the data before those people have actually left. Actually, it's been really great to be part of this study because typically when you do something like a survival analysis, you're looking like you have cancer. Now, how long till you die? Real downer stuff, you know? So only 88 people got locked up and a few people died. This wasn't as bad. Wasn't as sad as it could have been. So the problem is that we're still, we had to kind of cut it off somewhere. We got to draw the line and say, at this point, we need to start looking at the data because we can't keep this going in, in perpetuity. So essentially we signify when that they're still with the company at the time that we pulled the data, if you will. Then we can line them up and we have consistency in our time frame, which as you can see here on the right-hand side of this graphic. Of course, we make a note that they've been censored, but we get a lot more, we got to get a lot more explainability whether we do it, if we do it this way versus if we do just a 0 and 1, you're going to lose a lot. And I should also point out that analyses that don't consider censoring in their data, you lead to a lot more biased results. So if you think of like a simple like a life table, Stephen's point, right? Okay, time to go back to Poland. Am I right? So Warclaw, Poland, when they first developed the life table for basically people who were born in the church and then died in the church, those kind of analyses, we don't account for them being censored because all the data is in the church in Warclaw, right? But here we've gone further. We can actually use analyses that can account for that and lead to less biased results. So enter the Cox regression, all right, or Cox proportional hazard. So this is a table of the results looking at the coefficients, also the z-score, which if any of my students are in here, they're excited to see that the z-score there with the critical value at the bottom. And you'll notice the one in brown. We use brown because brown's kind of like a poop color, right? So that one's I know it just got a little, that one's not significant, but I still think it's very important. It's very important. I'll talk a little bit about that more, but you'll see that one didn't make it into that critical region. So I'm not going to talk more about this slide here, but I would like to talk about it in this next 2 slides. Wait, before I get there, I forgot. We do want to tease out the definitions, and Dr. Pflughoeft did an awesome job at this actually on the title slide, but it is a virtual minefield with churn rate, attrition, retention. Now we're talking positive, loyalty. So the churn rate is cumulative. So that's important to keep in mind because we've looked at this since way back, right? We have a lot of data in there. And this is basically the percentage of people who defected within that time period. So if you just think of like a fraction, my wife teaches first grade and her students would probably get turned into hives if I said the word fraction. But anyway, we said if we think of the numerator as basically those who had left when the denominator of all the customers we had during that time period, that's what we're looking for churn rate. The hazard rate, on the other hand, is a little more complex. So we've kind of tried to like slim this down a bit for our audience. Not saying you guys can't handle the truth. You can all handle it, but we only have so much time, right? So for hazard, I actually kind of want to reference a study that was popular in 2019. Nothing interesting was happening in 2019, right? Anyway, something else happened really interesting in the medical literature in 2019, and there was a study that looked at people who ate 4 or more servings of hot chili peppers a week had less exposure to cardiovascular disease. That's a lot of chili sauce, just to be honest with you. That's a lot. But this is the first time that kind of Cox proportional hazard, I think, really made the headlines. They'd even talked about it on CNN. So if you want to think about this in my numerator denominator, basically here we have a numerator of people who ate chilies 4 times a week and then how likely they were to develop heart disease. Then the denominator is the other group, the group that didn't eat 4 chilies, probably all of us, right? Those who didn't eat chilies 4 times a week. And we basically look at the proportion between those hazards. So here, hazard is not cardiovascular disease. Again, thank you for not being a downer topic. It's just leaving the company, okay? No longer being a customer. So let's take a look at the interpretation element. And this is kind of fun because we can kind of try to read in and look at it a bit. So age is listed top here, and you might be thinking, hey, I see that 31%. Why the heck would that be listed above some of those, juicy 80 and 70s down there? Because it can escalate so quickly. So it's 30% more for each 10 years. So the youngest oh my gosh, sorry guys, my background. The youngest customers in our sample, 18, right? So 18 to 28, that's a 10-year jump, right? But let's say you go beyond 28, right? And you go up to 38, right? Now we're at 62%. So this really builds quickly, which is why it has that kind of premier spot on this slide. Also, I want to point out this cool color coding that Dr. Pflughoeft came up with. I love it. The greens are good and the reds are bad. So this is good. So the older customers, as Alick mentioned, the older you get, actually is better. They're more likely to stay with the company. When we look at the zones, 81% more risk of attriting if they weren't in that black highlighted zone. Those are the less loyal areas. The next two, there's an increased risk of leaving if there's cable available or fiber available. Basically, there's other technologies customers might want to take part in, which we could lose. Single dwellings versus multi-units, actually more favorable, less likely to defect. Love the word defect, by the way. It makes me feel like I'm playing a spy game, right? But less likely to defect. Credit card holders, also less likely to attrit if they had a credit card, probably ease of payment and things like that. The one that Alick highlighted here last is price. Don't go and raise your prices to keep your customers, but if you had a more expensive plan, you probably had better service, you had faster speed, and that made you happier overall with what you were getting. All right, so part two, joint account holders. This one I think is interesting because I'm married. So if you have a joint account, like another adult in the household, like my wife, to make the decision with, it's harder to leave because you both have to agree on that. So that's a good thing. Income, basically, we had a $100 or $10,000 increase would decrease attrition. So more affluent policyholders, again, could afford to stay or afford not to care if they had what plan they had. DSL, increased risk. Again, that's kind of a competing source there. We talked about census tract density, which again, that increased risk on that one. There was multiple adults in the household. So kind of the similar idea to if you're a joint count holder, but these are separate variables. Competitive tower distance. So if there was a competing tower close, that could potentially increase your risk of attriting because you maybe had good signal with the competitor. And then BT, Bug Tussel tower distance was insignificant, but I still think it's important to mention that as well. So 98% are within 5 miles. So that's really great for connection to customers. So I know at this point you're like, that's all great, Butz, but did you check all the assumptions before going into this? Of course, Dr. Pflughoeft wouldn't let us do it without. So one important assumption to take a look at is if they're parallel curves, which makes sense because you want to be able to have nice two distinct groups to follow as you move through that survival, the kind of the Kaplan-Meier survival plot. We see a good one won't overlap. One that does overlap may be bad, but honestly, okay, most of the time when it does it way at the trail. I mean, by that time, so many have already not survived that it's really less consequential. Another thing that I know I've seen some students in the back thinking this, what about homoscedasticity, right? What the heck? I'm worried about it. And well, don't worry, we've looked at that too. So we want to make sure that when you're looking at the residuals, essentially that there's nothing systematic going on. You kind of want that random spread. And when you have a random spread and you go ahead and just make one of these Schofield residual plots, you'll have a nice red line, nice and straight. So that's a good one. And you'll see that a lot of ours turned out that way. I just have one sample one that we have on the left-hand side. One that was more curvilinear, you'll see that on the one to the right. This is okay still. It's not so bad, but this would be one to maybe kind of be a little more, I don't know, it's not as nice as it could be in that regard. So what happens if it's not as nice as it could be? Maybe we need to use a different analysis. In this case, I say our assumptions are met. So Cox proportional hazard was a great choice, but you might want to try something else if the assumptions for sure are not met. So random survival forest, which I think sounds like a really cool like corn maze, right? Welcome to the random survival forest. Not everyone's going to make it. So this essentially is a little more of a black box technique. So we lose some of the ability to communicate what's going on here because it comes a bit of a steeplechase about which essentially trees are going to emerge as being the most prominent. So keep in mind here that the percentages this time now are the importance percentage in the model that won. So this is not the same as the percentages you saw in other ones. First point to kind of bring in is that the data was split 70-30 into training data versus testing data. And when we had a naive forecast, which is basically just that next record after we've had the training data, we only had 55% accuracy. So this then resulting array here added a model improvement of 22% because this survival forest accuracy was 77%. So that's a really good thing. So you'll see a lot of similarity between results here with what we saw on the Cox proportional hazard, which again is a good thing. We have the BT tower distance shown here with strike throughs to remind you that that was non-significant in the other model, but also not, I don't think, a deal breaker, as they say. So what does management want to get out of this? Oftentimes with a attrition study, you want to know, well, where should we focus our attention with customers? All right. So we've got 3 to look at, 3 sample customers, and Alick run these. He found all these. So thank you so much for doing that. So the first one on the top, as we read down, this customer is likely to leave. The churn rate probability on the very far right column, 99%. This individual has 1 foot firmly out the door, I think. It would take a minor miracle to keep them around. So this one, management might say, that's a lost cause. Don't put resources on trying to save that person, so to speak. Why is that? Take a look. Look at the age. The age is young. We know the relationship with age already. If you move over to their zone, right? They're not in the sweet zone, that 1 through 3. They're not there either. Their price, they've got a cheaper plan. They have 40. Fiber and cable, one means they're available. So they've got other options there. And I won't read the rest, but you'll see the relationship between the variables, right? This is exactly what we found. Okay, the 1 row down then, this looks at a customer who we should be worried about leaving. And from a management's perspective, if we pull this record and say, could we maybe do something? Like they're at 85% risk, but if we jump in now, we send them an email and say, hey, special rates, we're going to cut you a discount for this next 5 months. Maybe this is a candidate of someone that we could potentially still keep. So that's important. Again, how did we come up with this? Well, they're 51, so they're older. That's helpful. Price, they're already in the $50 plan, so they're probably enjoying a little more speed. And they don't have both those competing fiber and cable. There's no fiber in their area. So that helps us maybe keep our claws sunk into them. Is that too? Okay, I just have to. The last one is green. This customer is likely to stay. There's only a 5% probability of churn on this last customer. Again, they're older. They're pushing 60, which is still young. Okay, but they're pushing 60. They're in the $60 plan, right? And they're getting even faster speeds than either of the 2 previous ones I mentioned. And they also can't sign up for fiber or cable because it's not in their area. So this person we maybe don't have to put much marketing effort into because they're likely to stay already anyway. All right, so I'm going to now pass the baton back to Dr. Pflughoeft for our closing. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alex and Nick. Well, what's our future direction? I think the next project is to finish up a paper, and we're going to try to get that done by December and publish it. The current CEO, Jason, basically agreed to that. So we're working on that. We got a little bit more work before we get to that stage. As to this project in particular, it's going to be Alec's project going forward. He's kind of their data strategy now. Getting basically, analysis into the decision-making process. And so we're really proud that Alick can make a good contribution at Bug Tussel. Other than that, not too much else. I was a little bit happy that Nick said that 60-year-old people were still young, but otherwise, we'll just open it up for questions if anybody has a question for us.